You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seat belts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast, coming to you live on my birthday. I am 38 today, and what a better time to discuss our thoughts on Eternal Weekend.
Yeah, buddy.
Because we were both there this weekend. If you followed us on Twitter, you saw some of the posts. And, of course, getting older is eternal. So, with that, let's take it away.
So we were there for different reasons. You were there to actually work the event. I was there to observe and maybe play some sides, depending on how well my locals did. And I wanted to start this discussion from basically the lead up to travel days. Those were different days for us. I drove in on Thursday, which is day one of Eternal Weekend. You flew out earlier in the week.
Yeah, I flew out Wednesday.
Yeah. Before, you're going to have a long thing to do. For me, the lead up for travel, just as an observer, was very easy. I had people playing in the Vintage and the Legacy stuff, so I just had to get them their cards and then build the Oath of Druids shell plus an extra 15 cards for team trios if none of my teammates made top 8 of either the Vintage or the Legacy event. That was all done on Monday, and then I just had the rest of my week in front of me. What was your lead up like?
So lead up was, a few weeks prior, procuring my plane tickets, and it was a conversation of, when is setup? Because it wasn't disclosed like when you signed up when setup would be. It was in your vendor packet that they sent out. Because at Magic Cons, if it's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday event, Wednesday is your setup day. Eternal Weekend, while there was setup the day before, that setup was for the hall itself, not for vendors. We basically had,
that's
2 hours Thursday morning, and
so,
that was it.
When you say the hall itself, people that might have seen what was going on in the hall, and that basically saw it all. You're talking about the banners that were put in place, the standees, the
chairs,
stages.
tables.
Yeah. Okay. There was nothing kind of over the top at EW. It's not the kind of event that feels like a MagicCon. That's not what it's meant to be. So there weren't any panels or anything like that. There were artists there, but it was not meant to have this kind of con atmosphere. Okay, so Wednesday is just literally the con gets, whatever. Eternal Weekend gets set up.
The infrastructure is put in place on Wednesday.
Yeah.
For the event. And then Thursday, your booths are already set up when you walk in. They have your paper on them that says this is where you are, so just come in, set up, boom, you're good to go.
Yep.
The interesting thing about this was we did have VIP badges, but they weren't like MagicCon badges where you get in early.
Okay.
It's, you got in maybe 30 minutes early, but realistically, especially on Thursday, there just wasn't a lot of security preventing people from getting in because you've got a badge, whatever, just go.
So I assume no vendors were really coming in through the front door because you guys had loading dock access. So
yeah,
the comings and goings that you're speaking of were through the main convention hall doors.
Yes, sorry, yeah. Which, by the way, the best part about Pitt is their convention center's loading docks run right into the parking lot and right into the event hall, so it's really easy.
Yep.
So we come in through the back, we get set up, whatever, and then everyone comes in through the front doors, and that's where it's, you've got a badge, whatever, go in.
Sure.
So that was interesting, and Thursday, as, may have been the case for you as well, really did feel like Friday of a Midwest Grand Prix or MagicCon, whatever.
Yeah. I got in late, but that's basically what was explained to me because my guys were trying to grind sides for the singular buy that I believe you could receive.
Yeah. The other really interesting thing about Thursday was your usual scramble to find the last 2 to 3 cards you need for your sideboard. I am not kidding. For the 4th EW in a row, the most asked about card for the entire weekend was Fragmentize. That's what everybody needed for their sideboards. There was one person running around Thursday that was like, if you have a Fragmentize, I'll give you $10 for it. And I was like, man, you're pretty desperate, aren't you? And he looks dead at me and he says, I already registered my deck.
Oh, yeah, this is definitely a thing that happens. So Fragmentize, the sorcery from, what is this?
Kaladesh? Yeah.
Destroy target artifact or enchantment which with converted mana cost 1 or less. Okay. Useful in all formats. The other one, I believe, that I heard people were asking for is Soul Rend from Mirage. Yeah, it's a slow trip. 1 and a black instant. Bury target creature if it is white, which just reads destroy can't be regenerated. Draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So it is basically just 2 mana, effectively
kill your
Atroxa. No, kill your Atroxa.
Oh yeah,
it was for the for the vintage event only, but that was one of those cards that Michael from Toa was posting about like 2 weeks leading into EW, which is just if you know you need cruft like this, get your orders into any vendor you know that's going so they have it on prem, because stuff like this, Fragmentize and Soul Rend, not going to be in the room. And on top of that, Thursday I had locals there. And I was in contact with you. There were seemingly no copies of Oath of Druids from Exodus, and Flash from Mirage, extremely difficult to find. Dice City came up big for me with the Flashes. They had them in their backstock, and they were the only vendor that, as far as I could tell, that had Flashes on-prem, and I talked to everyone.
95 did eventually get them, but it wasn't until Saturday.
Which makes sense, because they needed to buy them.
You're done with vintage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to try and get them before this scrum that you're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, if I have somebody there that isn't you, so like a local that's there when the doors open, can they walk around and just shop cases for me and pick up one of each so I don't have to pull cards from my cube?
Yeah.
And so this is not uncommon. It happens all the time, like you said, at EW, at Grand Prix, Magic Cons, Magic Fests. People do this all the time.
Yeah.
And I guess it's good to see that some traditions never change.
It certainly did not.
And I think Thursday was kind of short for everyone, despite the fact that there were events running all day long, because there's mainly challenges, like I said, for buys. And I believe one of the people that I was at the Steelers game with asked if this is the most by population of Magic players, the football game with the largest population of Magic players at it ever.
Probably.
Because the Steelers were poopy poop going into that game. If you bought your tickets ahead of time like we did, it cost us $100. Day of, it was like 40 or less.
Yeah.
And apparently a ton of people ended up at that game because effectively the hall was, let's say, closed around 8 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And everybody just kind of coalesced there because it was something to do at night that wasn't too far away from the convention center. I heard it was like a 30-minute round trip walk.
Yeah, it was not bad at all.
So it was easy peasy, lemon squeezy, and Thursday is just kind of a low impact day for you guys. There's not, right?
Yeah, it was pretty low impact. There were a couple of like vendor to vendor deals, but that's kind of, the way EW is structured, it's actually difficult to do those on Sunday because of the champs events, the finals, and all of the sides. Although, again, it is kind of similar to a Midwest GP, despite being technically on the East Coast.
Yep.
But yes, Thursday was like it did feel like your old Fridays from, pre-pandemic events where, up until about 4 or 5 o'clock, it's basically dead. I think there were at most 200 people in the hall up until that point. Mm-hmm. And then people got off work, came in, or people finished their 4 to 5 hour drive
and did their
thing. And came in.
And we will talk about events that fire on the other days, but the schedule of events is still available, and if people want to go and take a look at the schedule of events for Thursday, every single event is a challenge. Nothing is more than that. So there's really not a lot to talk about in these regards. It's people just getting their warm-up reps effectively for the weekend. They're there to shop for the last few cards. They may test on-prem. In the challenges, they may go back to the hotels. But this is, like you said much earlier, and then we can move on. This is very much like the Friday of a Magic Fest. Yeah. People are just there to grind the last little bit of whatever they need. Cards for decks, a buy, or reps. Yeah. You're in, you're out, not the busiest day. Then we come into Friday, where we're both there. The Vintage main starts. I think there's like 500 plus people in it.
Yeah.
It took up the amount of room they expected, which was the back half of the room. The front half was where you walk in, was where all the side events were. And they started basically legacy sides almost immediately.
Yep.
And the one thing I wanted to note about those is that they grew in size throughout the day. So basically, as more people got to the venue because they weren't playing vintage, or people dropped out of the vintage event, the legacy sides began to get larger and larger. And the last event of the day was so large they couldn't fire it in the front half of the room. They had to go to the back half of the room where the vintage event was still going on, and took up about a third of the tables. So I think the number on that was well over 100 to maybe about 120 people in a challenge, whereas they were getting maybe, I think, 16 to 40 throughout the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So these are people looking to get their final reps in for that day. And then notably, also on Friday, these are two challenges I wanted to bring up in particular. There was an old school challenge, the first of a few, that follows Eternal Central rules, and a modern challenge, or maybe two of them on Friday.
I think it was 2 on Friday, but yeah.
So with people in the hall for vintage, like I said, aside from Soul Rend, maybe Fragmentize and some other odds and ends they were scrambling for on Thursday, my impression when I got there and I was walking around during the vintage rounds to watch my cards get played was that it was a pretty low-key start to the day. You had the vintage champs at 9, and then the next big event was at 9:30, which is the High Roller Legacy for 40 duels, which is like a $250 entry fee, and basically ran all day long.
Yeah.
And then aside from that, there was a vintage double up, which they did with Legacy on the next day, and then old school stuff. Otherwise, I don't think much other stuff fired. There are a lot of items on the schedule list, but they didn't fire, as far as I know, a single LCI anything all weekend. I talked to some people that signed up for the first on demand at like noonish, and they were there at 2, still waiting for it. And they didn't get around to firing a commander anything until very much late in the day, and it wasn't the CEDH pod. I believe it was just a regular commander thing.
Yeah, it was a regular one.
So the reason I wanted to bring up in particular the old school and the modern challenges was to see if anybody had kind of started to wander around and look for pieces of tech, especially with the modern banning and the format kind of changing.
So the big thing we had was obvious, and this has been every single Eternal weekend since Old School was created, Su Chi. Holy shit. Everyone needs Su Chi for that form.
Yep.
How do you not have them yet? You should have 12 at this rate. But we got asked a lot for Su Chi. And with Modern, it was as typical for a new metagame, I need the burn staples.
Yep. I think Blood Moon was also a very common ask as I was wandering around.
Insanely high on the ask list. Tishana's Tidebender throughout the entire weekend, so it wasn't just Legacy, it wasn't just Vintage.
Yep.
Modern people needed it too. And then we actually had a lot of people selling Furies, which is unfortunate because you missed the boat, guys.
But makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the big things were Su Chi and Tishana's Tidebinder, and we actually got some people asking about Agatha's Soul Cauldron because I assume they were on Yogg.
Or Scales.
Or Scales, yeah.
Right, yeah.
And a lot of people, I think the most asked for, like, pimp card or whatever was literally Sketch Foilers' Saga for the whole weekend.
Okay. Yeah, it's in all the formats that were going to be played there aside from Old School because it can't be played there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there were some people that were asking for no tower strip mines, which was interesting because that's literally how they asked for it was, do you have strip mine with no tower?
Which is 3 of the 4 arts, right?
Yeah.
It's full art, zoomed in art, even more zoomed in art, and then 1 zoom out art. Let me see.
Yeah, something like that, I think, yeah. But those were the things that people asked about. And the thing that I think was really interesting about Friday, and this was even talking to all of the other vendors, we were like, holy shit, this is amazing. This was the first event I can remember since pre-pandemic where the first 2 rounds of the main event were so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Because everybody was there to play. Every person that was there was, I am playing in this event. I am doing this. I'm not here to sell cards.
Yep.
I'm not here to trade. I am here to play in the event. And I talked to you about it. And like, that just feels awesome.
Yeah.
To have that again.
And as just an observer for Vintage, like I was watching a lot of the feature matches. I was talking with my players. There was next door to us a cheerleading convention.
Yeah.
And all you could really hear, aside from the murmur of Magic being played, was the music being pumped from the hall next door as they did their routines.
Yep.
And it became so ubiquitous with the day that when it stopped at the end of the day, we noticed. Because,
only time we noticed, yeah.
Because that was the background noise to the event. It wasn't infinite sides firing and judges coming over the loudspeaker and players and challenges. And that area, the challenge area, was right in front of your booth.
Yeah.
The hall was just people playing Magic, that white noise, and then behind that, the convention going next door. And it was very refreshing to hear and mirrored itself on Saturday as well as the Legacy event moved on throughout the day. And like you said, it was fantastic to hear and really, really cool and really interesting. Yeah. And then we move on to the event hall closes at midnight. Technically, vendors and most players are out at 8 because who's staying for the last couple of rounds unless you have players who go all the way to day 2. Yep. So that was a pain in the ass.
Legacy was a 2-day.
Yep.
Hell yes.
So that was Vintage. Vintage on Friday, right? Then we go to Saturday, which is the Legacy.
Yeah.
Thankfully,
which did end up being 2 days.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thankfully, none of my players made the Vintage and Legacy top 8s. That would have been terrible for me. So Saturday, we have the Legacy event start. And this one takes up the back half of the room and like, I'd say somewhere between a third and a half of the front half of the room, which is why really nothing else.
Probably a half, yeah.
Why nothing else was scheduled. They did up the cap a number of times, and I think they said the final number was just a hair under 1,000.
Yeah. So the cap was raised to 1050.
Yep, that's what the fire marshal okayed, basically.
Yeah, and they had like a little over 1,000 registered, and I think it was just under 1,000 showed up.
Yep. 994 or 95 people were seated for round 1. Yeah, is the way that went.
Ludicrous in the best way.
Yeah, and so that was the entire day. And that was just the same thing as Friday.
Yeah.
There were no Legacy sides until late in the afternoon. The Legacy mains started at 9. Yeah, about 3 p.m. was when the first true Legacy side started. There was the double up that started at 12, but that's basically meant for people who are already out of the main.
Yeah.
And then we had some what I think are more interesting events to note overall. We have another old school event, and if you follow Sam Black on Twitter, they believe that they broke the old school format with Library Tribal. They got destroyed on day 1 and then ran it back with some tweaks on day 2, and I think made it to the top 8 or top 4.
He lost in finals to one of my friends.
All right.
And we were like, hey, Chris, we're hungry. It's time to go. And Chris goes, hey, Sam, you want to split? And Sam goes, no.
Nope.
Don't want to. 15 minutes later, leaving for dinner.
Yep.
Chris smashed him.
I heard that happen a couple of times. One of my locals had to do that in a challenge. Like, you want to split? Nope. Mush the person in round 3 of the challenge in game 1. And they were like, you want to split? And he goes, nope. And then just pushes up in game 2. So they ran back old school.
Yeah.
And then they had a bunch of modern events. And this is what I wanted to point out. There's a modern RCQ for DreamHack at 10 a.m. And then about almost 4 hours later, there's a re-CQ. So you have your RCQ and then your re-CQ. So if you bomb the RCQ, I guess you can just double back up into the re-CQ. There's no real good explanation of what this event is. There's just a price and a structure. Yep. And the pricing structure is re-CQ pricing structure. Woohoo. And I imagine this is another driver for you guys for modern cards and modern asks on Saturday, kind of keeping people moving throughout the hall, keeping them interested in what's going on in the cases, and also for you as vendors, making sure that you're just not stocking old school, vintage, and legacy stuff.
So the I think the thing that this EW really convinced me of is how little difference there is between Eternal formats and Modern at this point, because of how pushed design has gotten.
That's fair.
Even most of the Modern players were looking for the same stuff as Legacy players. They were looking for your Modern Horizons 2 creatures. They were looking for fetches. They were looking for Urza sagas. They were looking for Force of Negations.
Yeah, Force of Vigor, Flusterstorm.
They're so similar that I don't know if they were Modern players. They might have been. They could have been Legacy or Vintage too. Mm-hmm. It's hard to say. The really interesting thing was we didn't bring much old school at all. We brought some, like high dollar, like Urnum Gens. There were a few Christopher Rush autographs that were brought as well.
Yeah.
But by and large, it wasn't something that we necessarily catered to, but there were multiple vendors that did. And the feedback was that it probably underperformed the most out of anything. But what they did sell was a way higher quality transaction when it sold.
For sure.
And Saturday especially was when we got all of the force questions. Like you said, Vigor, Negation. We got our Solitude, Subtlety. Do you have your Tidebinders? Stuff like that. And I'm not sure how much of it was people gearing for Modern and how much of it was people that were like, hey, I dropped out of the main. I'm going to try to make this other deck and grind it in sides now because, as well as I do, like people who love Legacy and Vintage plan their year around this event.
Yep.
So they're going to try whatever they can to get it in Paper Magic because it is a completely different meta than Moto. But that was the day that I think we had the highest foot traffic at the booth by far.
Okay. Was
Saturday after about 3 or 4 o'clock. That was the day that to me, throughout the whole day, I'm like, man, this event feels like a pre-pandemic event. This feels like everyone is here to play the game. They're having a blast. They're taking it seriously, but also understanding like, hey, at the end of the day, it is just a game. It's not life or death. And it just felt good to be at that event. And especially Saturday I remember talking to some of the other vendors like, no, this feels like events used to.
Yeah.
If all events felt like this, we'd love doing events more.
Yeah.
But they don't. So
that's fair. And I got to see and feel basically what you're saying, which is just people were at this event to go to an event because it was the one they wanted to go to. It was their pilgrimage event. It was for them, tailored specifically to their interests. And it could have been for play reasons. It could have been for, I know the cards that I want will be there. You mentioned the old school overall performing poorly as a category, but being great as a transaction point. And what I want to point out about that is for the people that weren't there, your statement masks a little bit the stock that was in the room. So when you say old school, you don't just mean the playables in the format. There were vendors with island booths where an entire side of the island was just dedicated.
Was old school.
Exactly. Not power and duels, but cards you saw from Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, Legends, etc. The
Icy Manipulators, Ivory Towers,
just nostalgic cards. A lot of them not necessarily not even good. It's just, hey, we have these cards from forever ago, and we would like to rehome them. Basically is kind of what it came down to. And so that is where as a category it fails, but as a transaction it is fantastic. Because there are people who do want to complete those sets, people who have fond memories of these cards. And so that's what you want to do, is you want to build that transaction. We've said it a number of times, so that that person comes back to you. It doesn't matter if they can't drive to your store, they can order from you online. And you've built up this customer. It's another new customer that will eventually graze the rest of your stock over time. Yeah. And while in the short term, they might be a customer in the red, they'll move to a customer in the black because they will just keep coming back.
Yeah.
And to round out the day, basically on Saturday, it's just challenges all the way down. More everything, more vintage, more modern, and legacy just kind of pops off in the afternoon. And day 3 just kind of caps out with a bunch of legacy rounds. And eventually we move into Sunday, which is, if you're there for play, kind of the big day. That is the last 2 rounds of legacy, because it's a 2-day event, like you said, 11 rounds. Then we go to vintage top 8. Then we go into legacy top 8. There is also a pre-modern showdown and a pre-modern challenge, and then another set of pre-modern showdowns and challenges throughout the day. There is yet another modern RCQ and re-CQ, and also a team trios event. And Sunday provides probably the most interesting selection of events overall when you look at the schedule because of this. Not because of the main that's going on anymore, because of the way they kind of changed what's going on. To the best of my knowledge, there were no other team events throughout the weekend, and this team trios format was modern, legacy, and vintage, which is one of the reasons why modern is most likely at this event overall, because they put it in team trios. So they want to give people the opportunity to play a new format before they jump in on Sunday. And pre-modern, as we mentioned above, also like old school, run at the Eternal Central rule set. And I know a lot of people who played in both vintage and or old school played in the pre-modern showdown, which seemed to have great attendance all day long. I imagine kind of like old school players, these people weren't really there looking for cards. Nobody was looking for survivals or cradles or whatever else goes on in that format anymore. I don't even know.
I have no idea.
So they have their 75, they're locked in, but it is an opportunity for sales back to booze. And then I think the Sunday is just kind of quiet for you, I imagine, as a vendor from a like, hey, do you have this weird card perspective, and moves more into, hey, I'm done with these cards. Would you like these cards?
Yeah. I think Sunday really was the day that it felt like the old Sunday sell-off. You know, it was, hey, I'm not going to play this again until literally this event next year.
Yep.
So let me sell you my mind break traps or my, fetches. The other interesting thing is, and this was true throughout the weekend, is this was the first time I can remember since pre-pandemic where people were just actively dumping binders into power. And Sunday was a day where a lot of that happened. Yep. Thursday, I think we sold about 7 pieces of power, which for a slow day is insane.
Pretty good.
And then Sunday, some of the same guys who bought the power from us Thursday were coming around saying, now I want to upgrade it to a black border version. Can I trade in this power I just bought from you 3 days ago? Yeah. What?
I mean, I saw that happening on Friday. I think somebody was basically just upgrading their beta to another better beta, like just a jet. Like, here's my black border jet. Give me a better looking black border jet.
Basically.
Yeah. Like, yeah. And then I saw.
I think it was awesome, frankly.
Yeah.
And Sunday, we had that. Sundays typically your first hour or two are kind of dead because there's not much going on except top 8 of the event.
And I want to actually
not the case this year though.
I want to touch on that for a moment. So the hall opens dead ass at 9 a.m. for the last 2 rounds of Legacy, and when I got there, I thought I got there maybe in the middle of round 1 at like 10 and change, but apparently they sped through that, and I got there for round 11, like the tail end of round 11.
Yeah.
And that room felt dead.
Mm-hmm. It was very much your Midwest Sunday.
Yeah.
If I'm not here for the event and I've finished my shopping, more or less, and I don't really have much else to do, I guess I'm out.
Yeah. Or I'm not coming in until I have to.
Yeah. And that was very basically what it was like on Sunday.
Yeah.
There were, again, not as many business to business transactions on Sunday. A lot of those got handled prior to that.
Okay.
We did have your collective dump offs and everything, and it was, I think we probably sold another 4 or 5 pieces of power on Sunday, and it was, hey, I've been shopping around all weekend. I'm either looking to upgrade the stuff I bought from you, or I am looking for the best price in the room. And I've monitored all the power that's moved. So, the interesting thing about Eternal Weekend as a vendor compared to other Magic events is that every single person is a savvy shopper. Because just your customer profile at this event is guys like our age. We're established. We're a little bit more knowledgeable about it. We kind of look at it as an investment. And all right, well, I'm actually going to shop smart here. And that happened until about 3 probably, and 3 was when it really died for vendors on Sunday.
Yeah. So I noticed that because I started the Team Trios event around them, which is basically like the last event of the weekend, in the sense that it was the last event that kind of mattered on Sunday.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna double check the schedule to make sure. Yep, Team Trios at 2:40. Then like they tried to fire mystery boosters sealed all weekend long, and like Godspeed to everybody that tried that. There was a vintage challenge event at 3:20, at 3:40 another pre-modern, and then at 4 p.m. another CEDH challenge. And to my memory, either none of those events fired, or they were so quick that by the time we got into round 3 of the Team Trios event, they basically said, "Y'all better hurry up and get out the room, because this is the last round of anything that's going on today." And then lo and behold, somebody threw out on Twitter that they wanted to do a cube for a mox. So the entry price was like whatever a ruby is, div 8.
Yeah. Cool.
In the hall. Yeah, we were driving on the way home and found out that happened. We're like, oh, interesting. So the hall did stay open. It stayed open for degeneracy.
Yes. As you would expect at Eternal Weekend.
Yeah. And so like it basically dies around 3, and you take your Grimace slippers and you're out by when?
Hell yeah. I left by 4 to get on. I was standby for an earlier flight, didn't get on, but got out of there. And I talked to, the guys at Level Up, and they left at about 5:36 was when they finished packing up and hit the road. Because again, Midwest events, you're just done at like 4. There's not much else there. I think when I left, there was maybe 300-400 people in the hall still.
Yep.
Now the thing about Eternal Weekend. Oh, sorry.
100 or 102 of them were all in the Team Trios.
Yeah.
There was a cap at 32, and then they just decided to kind of let it roll over. Let them have their fun.
They should have, yeah.
So yeah, that event was basically a third of the room that was left, to put things in perspective for people.
And the difference about Eternal Weekend compared to a Grand Prix or a traditional Magic event is, you may only have 200 or 300 people in there, but those 200 or 300 people actually are willing to spend money and may result in a multiple $1,000 transaction. Yeah. So some vendors I know actually did stay a little bit later because their expectation was, you know what? Even if we deal with 2 guys, they'll probably spend $5,000.
Oh, for sure. When we left, we split our last round. A 5-round event. We were out of there by about 7-ish, maybe a little after. We split the last round because everybody agreed that dinner was more equitable than 300 more ticks.
Yeah.
So we did that. We bounced, and basically like the divider in the room were like 3 or 4 islands of booths, and I think the only one still open in that island, or maybe the only ones even still in the room in those islands, was Toa.
Yeah.
Like all the rest of the island was gone. And then Card Titan had their booth there, and so that they were there till the bitter end.
Naturally.
But I assume everybody kind of packed up really slowly overall. For me, when I was there and then thinking back on it, it kind of feels like the Vegas that we did together. Was that like 2018 or something like that, 2017?
I think it was 19.
Maybe.
It was the last one, yeah.
The Hogak.
Yeah,
Hogak Summer.
The GAC Attack event.
Yeah. Then, like, to me, the only difference was that there were no panels or anything like that going on. And the bathrooms were easier to reach because we were in the appropriately sized hall. That was it.
Yeah.
It was the only difference. When we were at Vegas, I didn't notice or care about the command zone at all. It just never really impacted our part of the show, so I wouldn't even consider it when I'm looking back at this. Yeah. And one of the things I really enjoyed in thinking about these is how little Commander actually impacted both of these events.
It was great.
the Commander players were sequestered in their own area at Vegas, and like, sure, they did a ton of business at the booth, just like I'm sure there were like Commander players did a ton of business at EW, but they weren't like branded Commander players. You wouldn't really necessarily know it unless they were asking for like foileristic studies and like the anime smothering ties and like the obvious call-outs for like high-end Commander players. But it just felt, the rest of it felt like Vegas, where people were there to conduct business. You know, if they were grazing, they were grazing with a purpose. They weren't just going to walk out of the room and not spend money somewhere. And everybody in that room also had a purpose. They weren't just coming to see the event, because they were there to engage with the event in a meaningful way. And so for me, that's kind of the parallel event. And then the reason I chose Vegas compared to, I think, like, Minneapolis was similar because of the events that they ran on Prem.
Yeah.
But Vegas is Vegas, and so the bullshit comes out.
Yeah, like, it's the same like destination event that you would expect Eternal Weekend to be.
Well, and then the product was there for it. Like, Dice City cracked a box of Revised, and they were selling packs directly out of it. There were people who had Legends packs in cases. Yeah. Stuff like that. Like, so that's what I mean when I say, like, the bullshit was out. They brought the same kind of stuff you would expect in Vegas. But it was much more dense at EW because, for whatever reason, like, Vegas stopped living up to that kind of idea. It
genuinely did.
But you would expect it at Vegas.
Yeah.
Like this one, there's coming up in October. There's, man, if you want to blow like $4,000, you can spend more on tickets to go see the When We Were Young show, like 500 or something a ticket on one weekend, and the following weekend is MagicCon.
Mm-hmm.
But
just stick around.
Yep, that Vegas may blow the doors off and might feel like the first one again. And like we might see all that high-end stuff roll out like we do at EW, but that's neither here nor there. We'll see when we get there. But that's kind of how everything felt for me. Like, I'm happy I went. I would definitely go again. Would I want to play in either of the mains the next time? Like, maybe the reason I didn't play Legacy this time was because the deck I was most familiar with, I believe then, still do, that it is not a good long tournament event. I know a number of players who were there on the same list. I think one of them might have day 2'd. The rest of them kind of scrubbed. Yeah. But they were all, like, they all played sides and enjoyed themselves and had varying levels of success. And knowing that there are 1,000+ people in North America, or maybe outside of North America as well, that want to come in and play Legacy is really exciting. That is a number that we haven't seen in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, again, you know, the overall feel of this was like a pre-pandemic event, and I hope that Koss being able to announce the event as far ahead of time as he was.
Yeah, we talked about this
and
on Prem.
Yeah, and to get people the time to actually plan for it and adjust their work schedules, because again, the clientele for this event is not, you know, out here working at Target by and large. It's guys that, like, hey, we have lives, we have families, we have responsibilities, but we're sure as fuck going to come out if you give us the opportunity. We just need enough notice to plan for it.
Exactly. Yep.
And I really hope that the turnout for this event, the feedback for this event, everything really encourages Wizards to engage with these communities more.
For sure.
To bring more Eternal events to people because they want to play them. And if it doesn't, hey, I hope it inspires a bunch of other tournament organizers to do it.
Yeah. There's gold in them Nar Hills. You just got to give people...
You just got to mine them, but I promise it's there.
It's there, yeah, for sure. All right, anything else on EW before I move to picks?
No, but I'm going first because I have an EW pick.
Yeah, that's good.
So my pick, and this is yet again another market call out. This is Mindbreak Trap. So obviously people know that it's now like $70, $80 card or whatever it is. The interesting thing about this is that if you take a look at the stocks graph, Guess when it started to spike? Right around August 7th, August 8th. Well, you know what was announced on August 8th? Eternal Weekend. Now, if you look closer at the stocks graph, you can see that, like all good Magic players, everyone was panicking a week and a half before the event and buying this card out. Yep. So it spiked from 55 to 60, 70 in that range on the low end. Now, the reason I'm calling this card out is because guess what? It's going to keep going down at this point until it hits its floor, because all of the demand for this card, all of the reason this card was going for so much was entirely because of Eternal Weekend.
Yep.
Well, the Eternal Weekend's gone. So now it's going to go back down because the demand is dying, and frankly, it's probably just going to eat a reprint sometime soon in a secret lair.
I'm convinced that there's a Twitter account out there that's just dedicated to pointing out when traps could be reprinted in a set from a flavor standpoint.
Yeah. And you know, honestly, this is probably the one. This is probably the one that just gets the reprint and says, "Oh, look, there's the trap.
Yep.
You've activated the trap card.
No,
it's there."
I agree. This card is priced at, like, to infinity and beyond because it's useful in so many different places. And like the push for specifically Eternal Weekend and its utility in the vintage format by every deck, including Dredge, which I do believe does not play a single colored land still. It's 4 wastes, 4 wastelands, 4 Bazaar, 1 strip mine, I think is the mana base. That's what one of my locals was playing. This goes in the sideboard because when the format is based around 0 mana artifacts and somebody wants to go land, thing, win con, you just mind break trap them. And that is the game. Yeah. And that is extremely powerful and extremely important to vintage. Outside of that, you've got Commander players who play it. You've got CEDH players that play it. The only, like, it just doesn't see a whole lot of play in Modern, because we don't have that kind of, like, combo turn in Modern.
No.
And we don't see it that often in Legacy for similar reasons. The Cheerios style decks, Storm, are really bad. I still don't know how Bryant Cook made it into the top 8, but here we are. This is the world we live in.
He's just Bryant Cook on Storm.
Exactly. If anyone's just going to top 8 with the deck, it's like him and maybe 4 other people on the planet. So, like, good game. But again, we have Flusterstorm in Legacy, just like Modern, and because there aren't enough decks that play a critical mass of Cheerios in the early game that rely on them to remain in play, Mindbreak Trap just doesn't see play there. I saw it all the way at, let's see, I think I saw it, like, the cheapest one was somewhere in the 70s based on condition, non-foil, and I think the most expensive one I saw on the floor was 100, also based on condition, and that's where we were as a captive audience. We were overpaying market by about $25 for this card on the floor of the weekend. So yeah, I agree. Sell into the hype if people are buying, because this is a card that people will continue to play in these formats if they are accessible to them. And CEDH and Commander are basically meant to be accessible to everyone. The only hurdle here is the price.
Yeah. And that's why, you know, look, this is not, you know, I understand it was a hot card this weekend. I understand the price has been exploding. Please do not buy into the hype and just get rid of the card if you have it, and don't go chasing it. Yeah. Be patient. That's it. Just be patient.
Yep. I need to pick up another 2, and I only noticed that, like, this summer as it was slowly cresting up into the announcement, and then once it just spiked to, like, over 70 or something, I decided to just F it until I can either build up enough credit to be excited to spend that much in credit, or wait for it to hit a reprint.
Yeah.
Like, I have 3, which is not 4, which makes it very difficult to play the set in Vintage. But it is a card I played. It is a card I feared, but here we are. For me, my pick is Anger from Judgment specifically, because that's the one I was following, and it looks gross. If you've never seen it, it is. If you've ever played the game Clay Fighter, this art is straight from there.
The game is so good.
It is a 2/2 for 3 and a red. It has haste, and because it is an incarnation from Judgment, it functions from inside your graveyard. And Anger says, as long as it is in your graveyard and you control a mountain, creatures you control have haste. Very simple card. It is like Wonder and Brawn and I think Filth. I think that is the black one. And
Filth, Glory.
Or Valor.
Or Valor, yeah.
One of those two that we just named, Glory or Valor, is the white one and gives First Strike. Filth gives Swamp Walk. Brawn gives Trample, and which we have talked about a number of times actually on the podcast. Yeah. And Wonder gives Flying. All for the same clause. The uncommon incarnations from Judgment, when they are in the graveyard, and you have a basic of the appropriate type, they do a thing. Anger just happens to be haste. I added this to my tracker in early November. CK was buying 25 at $3.25. They had 2 for sale at $6.50, which is ridiculous. And there were 99 listings on TCG Player, and the market was about $3.40. Now there are 81 listings on TCG Player. The market is about the same. It's about 10 cents more. When I was taking my notes, CK was buying 32 at $3.25, so the exact same price, just more quantity. Now they are buying 36 at $3.70. So both of those numbers are up since I started taking my notes. And this is very much a reading the card, explains the card kind of thing, because when we play this in Commander, we basically want our creatures to have haste for, and I'm going to put this word in quote, reasons. Now, Anger, it provides a much-needed keyword to close out a game of Commander via the combat step, and that makes it a decent look. And providing it from the graveyard with a minor conditional check on that basic helps it maintain its status as a good look, but the primary issue is just getting it into the graveyard. This isn't Fervor, Fires of Yavimaya, Rhythm of the Wild, Hammer of Perforos, Concordant Crossroads, or Mass Hysteria, which is a real big knock against it in comparison. It doesn't give your creatures haste up front. You got to put in the work. This isn't Veteran Explorer, where when it enters the graveyard, everyone gets something. Anger only benefits you. As such, people are going to be more inclined to take 2 and make you find a way to get it into the graveyard overall. Now, up top, I did say this is a card for a deck that wants haste for, quote, reasons, unquote, and that could be because they want to just jam in combat, or it could be because they want to take advantage of activated abilities. Think something like Elves tapping for mana. Anger doesn't really play in CEDH. It's pretty much a casual Commander-only card, but casts a wide net due to its ability to be a redundant haste piece in a deck ranging from something that does fair things in combat to call it tap-out combo, because Elves are not fair, and neither are a handful of commanders out there that just want to activate and annoy the table.
Yeah.
Now, worth mentioning is that Anger does see play in pre-modern. It is in the Survival of the Fittest deck, where you just pitch it and go tutor up whatever it is you want to win with. I think no, you need a basic, so you can't do Hermit, but
yeah,
whatever. 1 green, put Anger in your graveyard with a mountain and play all creatures have haste. You figure it out from there. It's basically only in 2 decks, like I said, Survival, but also in Elves, which is a pretty narrow band of the field, but it's basically playing in the same space in both casual Commander and pre-modern, so there's like that. It's a very clear-cut card. Like I said, this is very much reading the card explains the card. From a timeline perspective, this is a very slow velocity card. We'll be out of stock of it in about 2 months, and that is not listings, that is all copies on TCG Player. And while the price trend of the Judgment version looks a bit crap when you look at the stocks graph, looking at more recent versions like the LTC printing, that's the Lord of the Rings, tells the story pretty clearly, and that is that regardless of the version, Anger is on the rise. The main reason the stocks graph for Judgment looks crap is because it's so long that you have to zoom in to see this rise, and it happens so soon that it's just really kind of hazy. But if you switch over to the LTC version, and I'll do that real quick, we can see this nice, like, positive trend, but just slowly over time. You know, it just keeps creeping up. So I chose to look at the Judgment version as it's a more unique art for a number of reasons, and that appears, sorry. And I really hope we never see it again, this piece of art. Because it's gross. It really is gross. And
I always thought it was kind of cute, honestly.
it's endearing. It really is.
He's just a cute little guy. You know, he's trying to find his way. He's angry. He can't find what he's looking for, so he's beating his way out of it.
You're not wrong about that. So the majority of what the Judgment version of Anger is doing, every other version of Anger is doing, and that's selling out in about 2 months. Velo is low on all of them, but it tracks that almost every version of Anger is going to sell out within 2 months. And as this continues to sell, seeing CK's buy list number holding while restocking, I expect we'll see all versions of Anger start to move on buy list outside of the 3-month mark. Now, what happened at CK recently is outside of my predictions based on what I've been seeing for the last month. But I still think it's going to be a 3-month hold for copies from TCG Player to move to CK for a decent amount of credit. We might be closer to 4, but I think it's still going to be a hold regardless. I don't think CK is just going to like jump up in price.
Yeah.
In terms of the open market, you can pretty much flip them back for profit almost immediately. So holding for longer yields more profit. So kind of, do what you want there because this sells so slowly but reliably. If you buy in at 350, you could list at 4 or 450, and we'll get there in time. It's just going to take longer, so this is just going to be kind of a sunk cost.
Yeah.
It's not a flashy spec that's going to double up. It's just a solid, quiet gainer. Reprint equity on this for the Judgment art. Again, I think we're totally in the clear on this thing. I don't think it's coming back. For the card in general, Anger gets a reprint in a Commander deck once every 2-ish years. And we just got the Lord of the Rings printing, so we've got another 2 on it. Prior to that, it was Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, which was, I think, a year or 2 ago. So we're basically in that cycle. So we're good for right now. And even then, a reprint doesn't impact us kind of the way we would expect it to with a lot of cards. It does introduce new stock, but because this card is like so reliable, it's just a longer term hold. Everything just kind of happens. And the price trend that I showed for the LTC version does show that even if you were to buy in shortly after release, you could get it for so cheap that you're able to flip it for profit in like 4 or 5 months, which is a little bit further than the time that I expected for buy list, but still kind of fits this model of like, Anger gets a reprint, it's 4 months to profit. You buy in now, it's 4 months to profit. Like, it's weird how Anger kind of moves in like these quarterly patterns.
It's all cyclical, right?
Yep. Buy quantity. I played in that era of standard and extended and in the early days of Commander, so I've got about a dozen of these, mainly from Judgment, and that's kind of where I'm happy. These shouldn't be hard to move from binders overall, but I don't think it's going to be a quick turnaround. So if you want to move these to buy list or back to TCG Player, you can probably go a bit deeper than if you wanted to move these to players overall. But at the end of the day, I don't think you're going to have a problem moving these. It's just how much money do you want to sink for about 4 months? How much are you comfortable with that? Because I got all of mine so long ago, I was probably paying somewhere in the neighborhood of about $2 for these anyway back then, because they were, along with Fires of Yavimaya and Concording Crossroads and Fervor, one of the only ways to give the entire squad haste. So it was required, so it had a price tag.
Yep.
And so basically I'm the same hole that almost everybody else is right now with these. And if I had to dig down into this hole from 0, I'd probably be happy, like I said, exactly where I am, which is just on about a dozen of these already. And I really don't want to have to come back and talk about Judgment Anger again, but I'm glad we're finally seeing cards from like the heyday of Commander kind of pick up. Now, I do want to mention, I didn't bring up EDHREC for any of this discussion. I have it up to take a look at and reference back, but there's nothing to reference because Anger just goes in every deck that has red.
Yep.
It
pretty much.
It doesn't really necessarily combo with anything too well. Like, the longer the game goes on, we're going to get some weird combos overall, but the majority of the combos are just how to put Anger in your graveyard for fun and profit. Like Skirk Prospector. cool, I guess. And then after that, what are the commanders, the top commanders on rec? Commanders that want to enter combat. Atali, Primal Storm, Ilharg, the Raise Boar, that kind of stuff. I'm like, can't help you, bud. You want haste for reasons. Like, yeah, you got it. And then you can just keep digging in, and you just float around on rec, and you start to see that, like, the more decks that want to play commanders or a lot of cards that tap out want haste, thus anger. They want to enter combat. They have red. They need haste, thus anger.
Yep.
And so this is just something that I think people need to be kind of made aware of. It's a low-level spec. It's low impact overall. It should be easy to move. And it's just, how many do you want and how long do you want to sit on it?
Yeah, I think this is also just a really interesting case study. And like you said, you know, a quarterly cycle almost.
Yeah.
Because this card does have a cyclical nature. It's also something that has, I don't know if a pedigree is the right way to say it, but it has an established archetype. It wants to do the same thing in every deck it wants to. It wants stuff to go fast.
Yep.
That's all it does. If the deck wants to go fast, it's probably running anger. And this is one of those cards that has that really universal appeal for casual players that I think means your floor is liquidity. And if a card is always liquid, to me, that's always worth having around.
Yep.
Just because liquid moves. It's that simple. Liquid moves, and this card will always sell. I don't care what the state of the game is. This card will always sell because casual players will always want to turn stuff sideways as fast as they possibly can.
Yep.
And it does that.
Exactly.
Solid.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be it for this week, right? Anything else we want to talk about for EW? All right.
I'm good.
So for at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube, I am at Halt. I am Reptar. You are
at Damon_Thurston.
And we'll see you next week.